Per- Yep, perfect. You guys can hear me okay? All right. So picking this meeting back up, we did approve the minutes from December 21st. And the next item is to review our proposed bylaws, and then review the next item after that is review recommendations for the school committee. What I did from our last meeting was I updated the draft bylaws as requested, and then added comments to those. So I think it probably makes sense if I can share my screen, and let me see if I can do that successfully here.
Whoops.
You all can see my screen? No? Not
Yeah,
yet.
we just see you.
All right, let's try this again. You see my screen now?
Coming. It's coming. All right. Good to go.
Good to go?
Mhm.
All right, so
There's a folder kind of blocking things. Can you? Yeah.
that work?
Yeah.
All right. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll kind of just go over what we talked about and then the comments, and we can certainly open it up for discussion. So the first thing that I wanted to do on the comments was, one of the things we talked about early on in this subcommittee was having a link directly to our regional agreement. So seeing that it was identified early on that gives us the flexibility as a school committee to make sure that there are not contradictions within the draft bylaw, within the bylaws, and with what exists in the regional agreement. So rather than restate things in the bylaws, having that link. So just pointing that out to the committee. Now, the other piece here is, again, as mentioned above, there's places where we'll reference that regional agreement and the exact section within that rather than restate that information. At the last meeting, we talked about the importance of an agenda, and in our existing bylaws, that agenda exists within that and says you must follow this agenda. Now, I believe we talked about giving the chair flexibility to manage the agenda. So I did add this element in here to give that chair under the duties that they shall manage the agenda, right? And I'll show you where that's referenced again later on. Subcommittees, we talked about having a link again to ad hoc subcommittee, to standing subcommittee. So having those links to say what their duties are. So having that ability, and we have that direct link. I'll pull that up if anybody needs to see that. So there were questions last time on this, and this I would anticipate we're going to have some discussion on. So this gets into quorum. So what I found in the research that I've done is that quorum for a meeting means more than 1/2 of member in attendance. Where that comes into conflict, and I'll just kind of pause here for a second to just make sure that it's understood, is that the vote of the committee. So I added this in here because this gets into majority vote. So action of the committee may require a majority of the vote as defined in section 1 of the regional agreement. So section 1 of the regional agreement, sections 1.7 and section 1.8, the committee, they specifically call out what a majority is. They use the term quorum, but they call out what a majority is. Quorum for that purpose is a majority. It's not what defines the body to meet. And I thought that gave enough clarity in terms of the fact that, to our point last time, you could have a quorum of a body or a full body or a subcommittee still have a vote. So there could be a situation where the full body meets with, there's 19 people in the body and we have a quorum with 11 people. And you could result in a vote of 5-6 where that actually is the majority, because we're looking at votes based upon the weighted versus quorum just being people. So there is a contradiction that could be perceived, but it does live within the regional agreement. And we can come back to that in a second, because I'm sure we'll have discussion on that. But I also wanted to add in here that the chair of the school committee will use his or her discretion to manage the agenda for committee meetings. A sample agenda is provided here, and that gives that sample. We talked about moving the student representatives report back up, and I did just that. And I think that's kind of it, and it encompassed what we talked about. So I wanted to at least open that up for discussion on that. If we do need to dive into 1.7 or 1.8, I'm happy to do that, but happy to discuss that. Sherry, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add, because I know that you mentioned you're waiting to hear back from, I think, MASC on that as well.
Yeah, excuse me, I'm still waiting to hear back from MASC. I do have a letter drafted and ready to go to the other regional districts who use weighted voting. So I don't have answers on any of that yet. I did have one question on the part. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Let me pull it back.
Do you need me to pull it back up?
I have it up too. I just find it. Just the part where we're talking about majority. The vote of the committee is majority vote, but of course we have those votes where we need 2/3. So I just want to make sure that it's clear.
So this is how I perceive it, that let's talk quorum first. Quorum is number of people, just like we needed 4 people to meet here tonight. If we were in a weighted voting scenario, the weights of each individual, so 4 people show up, this is my understanding. You have your total weight. That's the total weight of those 4 members. Majority would be above half of that. So 2/3 would be 2/3 of that, the weight of the total. So you have 19 people who show up. Here's the total amount. 2/3 is 2/3 of that weighted total.
Right. I agree. I'm just conflicted on if saying that the vote of the committee is the majority, whereas we do have some votes that require 2/3, so that it won't always be the majority of the committee. It will be 2/3 of the committee.
Correct.
So I don't know if it matters.
Go ahead, Brett.
I had the same thought, so I agree with Sherry. I think we need to note it somehow. That's all.
So let's hang on just one second here.
I think the word majority is the sticking point. I just don't know if it's the right word.
Yeah, let me just hang on one second. And I apologize for I'm a Zoom guy, so I don't always use Google Meets, but let me make sure you guys, everybody can. Let me just share something. Tab. All right. So you can see my screen. This is in the regional agreement. So it talks about in 1.7, it talks about that actual weighted vote of each member is nearly equal to 1 as possible, and it goes through the total weight, etc. But this is where I think we're covered, is the quorum for the transaction of the committee business shall be a majority of the total value of all committee members as defined in 1.7. So a weighted vote less than the majority may adjourn, but may take no other action. So I agree with you, Sherry, because this just talks about a majority. It also, I assume that this would be the same with a 2/3 point. So we probably need to identify 2/3 here, because this just talks about majority voting. And we can't at this point cannot adjust the regional agreement. So then the question is, do we add that into the bylaws? It looks like somebody has a hand raised. Member Beardmore, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to forget about it. Who can take that action? Do we update the bylaws now because we can, and just know that we have to do the regional? How do we?
We can't up, we cannot update the regional without go through a specific process of being approved by the committee, then approved by the member towns, and then going through that process.
What's the harm in updating the bylaws now and during the regional agreement to align next year? Because I think the process means you're saying it can't be done until next year.
If we were to send it back to towns to vote on and go through that process, but there's no harm in updating the bylaws to account for a 2/3 vote.
That's my recommendation. I don't know how. I mean, future business. I don't know, Sherry.
I mean,
Okay. Well, I think we should at least put it in the bylaws because if we don't, we'll forget.
Scott, I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, it wasn't my turn to talk anyway, but now that I've been recognized. So the very next section, 1.10.1 in the regional agreement talks about a 2/3 vote.
It does.
It's specific to the budget, but I think in my mind, it's pretty clear that would apply to any other 2/3 vote.
And that's what I was just going to bring up is the next clause talks about 2/3 on the budget. So to me, I think it's just a matter of making that transition to weighted voting. Then it's when you take a vote, it's your hand is worth what it's worth in a weight, not in terms of one versus another. And the biggest concerns are what we talked about last time is you could have a quorum of 13 people, a vote could go 6-7 and appear as if it failed, but it could actually pass. Or it could go 7-6 and appear as if it passes, but it could fail based upon a majority unweighted.
Yes, and I was playing around with the spreadsheet. I think it's the 1 vote margins that it could get tricky. I couldn't figure out a way that you could get a 2 vote margin and it go the other way. I don't think it's possible, although that could change in the future as we reweight. But yes, a very close vote within 1 vote. And I also think, the current practice where the chair abstains, I think maybe not be a great idea going forward because of the weighted voting, because it's going to throw off those weights even more if people start abstaining.
Our bylaws require the chair to vote on any vote around the budget and or as a tie-breaking vote. I'm not sure if we can say that the chair has to vote on everything because nobody has to vote on everything, but we might try to encourage that behavior that everybody should vote because of the impact of weighted voting.
Yeah, and I think with weighted voting, it's going to be very rare to have a tie vote at all. And it's probably somehow possible, depending on who shows up and how the votes break. But it's going to be, I think, much less frequent to have a tied vote.
Well, you could have, to your point, Scott, you could have the perception of a tie 6-6, but it's not a tie,
Absolutely.
right? So Go ahead, Sherry.
It just goes back to the guided by Robert's rules that in a committee of more than 12, the chair should abstain.
Mm-hmm.
But we use Robert's rules as a guide, right?
Right,
So
and even that says should. So.
Right. Yeah, so that's the loose end of it. That it's always going to probably have a little bit of grayness to that.
So that's why I think it would be wise that we record all the votes some way. I think we have the spreadsheet, which is already there, which I think is the way we're going to have to do it. And I think the minutes, every time we have a roll call vote, I think it would be smart to just include in the minutes the total of the vote so people can look at it and, see for themselves what the vote was. Because it could be confusing if you don't know.
It's going to be, and we're going to have to think of technology behind it, because just because somebody's at a meeting does not mean they're going to necessarily cast a vote, especially if they abstain.
Yep.
Go ahead, Brett.
We might want to flag like a footer or a note just as a reminder, like, hey, weighted voting is now effective, or put a date, just just so it's a little more visible, like so people don't go 6-6 and it was not a tie. Like this is gonna be.
I mean, I'd love to get into a process of if that's the case is, and Jim, I would leave this as maybe an action item we could look at is we often project at our meetings. If we could just have some technology that projects even in a little corner, here's the spreadsheet so people could see how the votes were tabulating. Either after the fact, you don't need to do it while people are voting, but after the fact to be able to at least represent it and then do a save as and just use that as a reference point. Go ahead, Jim.
No, I agree. I'm actually afraid to touch anything because I'm afraid I'm going to drop the meeting again. But I think we could copy, the sheet and then, almost rename it. So this vote at this time and have a running record kind of as you're suggesting. I'd also offer that if people would want, Barry Sklar had put this together for us, and whether it be this subcommittee or a different iteration or someplace else, I'm sure he'd be happy to hear. I mean, he just did that on his own. And so if there's some thoughts on how that form could be more useful or some things that could be added, I'm sure he'd be all ears to that process. And just one final thought, it's really tricky when I'm listening to you all and talking about the chair abstaining. Yeah, it would almost be a disadvantage for a town to have their member be chair, which sounds crazy, but
That's right.
it'd be true. And so it's almost I almost, if I was a member, I wouldn't almost want somebody from my own town to be chair in some ways.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's an interesting perspective, but it's actually, so we've got to just, I'm not going to tell Sherry as to how to interpret Robert's rules, but it might be one of those things that maybe behavior just changes with, we try to encourage people to vote on it because of the importance of that. I mean, at the end of the day, again, it comes down to an individual member as a committee making that decision. And Sherry could also hand over the gavel to the vice chair, and then the vice chair is on the hook for counting against their town.
I'd like to see the chair be able to use discretion when
I would too.
Really needed.
So that's the hope here, Sherry, is I think that some of the feedback that you've given in this meeting is in these meetings is, these bylaws, I hope are removing some of those kind of restrictions that you felt around, say, agenda, the way that the meeting's structured, giving a little bit more leeway in that regard for discussions and moving things along. So hopefully it follows the same suit when it comes to voting, that maybe we do have those things in there that are required, for instance, the financial ones in a tiebreaker, but also just using your discretion as chair to cast the vote. I would encourage, though, as we think about that, if we are voting around in, say, the normal order, if you are voting, just cast the vote when it goes around, and then just it becomes part of the process. Go ahead.
I just think
Sherry.
from Randy's standpoint, it's going to be very difficult to be clicking around in that spreadsheet if we don't go in some sort of order all the time.
That's right.
And I don't know if that means that we stick to alphabetical and maybe we start at different points in the alphabet so everybody knows kind of where they go, but Randy can just go down a list, because I think that it'd be very difficult if we're just going around a room and she's having to click around for each vote.
I agree.
I would go ahead. I would suggest, I've read a few things on it, right? Like if you go in the same order every time, somebody might strategically position themselves. Whether that changes the outcome of a vote, I'm not really sure it does. There's arguments that could be made. I would recommend probably going in an alphabetical order, but maybe changing the starting point at a different meeting and kind of randomizing that. So it starts at everybody at some point and then it's the same order throughout that meeting or what have you. Because to your point, Sherry, part of this is we want to keep a meeting moving and we don't want to be hanging there saying, how did the vote turn out? Now, if we're sitting at a meeting, and let's just take the example of 12 people, like we're talking about 6-6, we're going to be sitting there waiting to see how the vote turns out. But if it's 9-3, we can say the motion passes. Randy can take care of the calculation, and we can probably move on, because a 9-3 vote is probably not going to pass in a weighted format. Okay. So, I mean, that's what I had to discuss today in terms of, I think, what we talked about at last meeting. And I know the other piece was talking about now recommendations for the school committee. And we talked about it a little bit last time, but my thought was to probably share these out with the full body and ask for feedback at a follow-up, ask them to provide feedback, and we have a follow-up meeting to have that feedback, and then figure out how we perhaps want to take that feedback, or then come back and present it to the full body. I see some nods here. The question is, how do we do that? I could compose something and have it go out through Randy, and just have Randy send that out and just ask for that feedback to be kept out of our viewpoint in a shared folder. Then she can share that out and we can review it perhaps at our next subcommittee. Do we want to do that? Do we want to send it out and have the feedback presented at full school committee?
I think it worked better when we did it at a subcommittee offline. Thought it worked well last time.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's going to take some time to go through. So it's probably better at a subcommittee meeting than taking the time from one of our regular meetings.
I think too, we can, if there's something, majorly egregious that comes off across, multiple members' input, we could also present that back at the full committee. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
So a couple things to just keep in mind. I think I mentioned this at the last meeting. If we were to take action at full school committee, our bylaws require a 14-day notice of here are proposed changes. They do not have to be the changes that you vote on or motion. It just has to be brought to the committee's attention. I'm not a big believer in, unless you all think we should, but I think when we ask for feedback, it's not, here's your 14-day notice, give us feedback. It's more, as part of the process, we want to have feedback, and then we meet as a subcommittee, then make sure that there's ample time between digesting that and then giving that 14 days. Thoughts on that? So having said that, budget season's going to be coming up. If we were to say get an email out tomorrow asking for feedback, when would we want to meet as a subcommittee? How long do we think it's fair to ask for that feedback? Do we want to allow for a full meeting to happen where we can remind people before we answer that? Brett, I see that you've raised your hand. You're on mute, Brett.
I'll say you can continue your thought.
Okay. That was my thought.
I thought we were going to present to the committee, then take feedback and finalize, and then vote on it. I think if we hand this out to people, it's going to be a lot of shock.
So you think we should present what we've done tonight first, then get feedback, and then have another presentation?
I thought vote. I thought we had to vote these into place.
We do. So the question is, do we want to get these? So help me understand what you're thinking of the next.
I thought we were going to present first. I think if we send these out in an email, could catch people by shock and surprise.
What if we were to say, here's an update from the ad hoc subcommittee? We've taken our best and give some of the comments of here's what we've taken into account. We wanted to get your feedback on this. prior to a presentation to the full body.
Yeah, okay.
My fear, and I think it's not a fear, but I think the last time we discussed is if we present to the body, then are they going to have enough time to kind of digest, read it? Is it going to be kind of knee jerk? Well, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Versus like, let's take the overall feedback and think about it, because odds are, I'm guessing some of the feedback is going to be things that we've spent a lot of hours deliberating amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm open
Yeah.
to
And I
either
think
way.
that backlash is just going to be coming, and we just have to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
No matter how it's like rip that Band-Aid off fast.
Yeah.
If we think that they're 90% done, then yeah, let's go.
Are we comfortable? Do we want to do it in the email? Give us feedback. Or are we comfortable to say, hey, we're comfortable with these and let's present them and see what happens with feedback?
I don't see why it needs to be one or the other, unless it's just a timing thing. I think we can send them out, and if we have a meeting within the feedback period, then great. We can present them what the changes are.
Well, that's the question that I really have, Scott, is do we
Yeah.
as a subcommittee need to meet again before going to the full body? I see Brett shaking his head no. I see Scott. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Scott, but I think you're saying if we get feedback and need to, then we should, but I don't hear any reason why. Go ahead, Brett.
I had one question about it. I thought you had a protocol drafted. You had some sort of worksheet. Did that get tabled? Is it still moving forward? And it's good. Don't you remember? Wasn't there a worksheet?
The working protocols?
Yeah.
We have the working protocols too. We went over those at the very first meeting.
All right. So they're good to go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I thought it was a worksheet.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Thank you.
So I think that if we want to vote on these at the second January meeting, this whatever it is, the 17th or something, yeah, 17th, then we have to have the actual text that we're approving finalized and feedback having already been given. Because I think that if we get to the point where we're voting and there's a motion and then amendments, it's going to get really messy.
Yeah.
So I would just like to see feedback before we go to a vote, so that hopefully when we do go to a vote, it's clean.
So I probably will not be at the meeting on the 17th. I'm going to more than likely be out of state that day. So whether it matters or not, I just kind of will call that out from a timing perspective. But yeah, I agree with you that it should be clean at that point. So maybe I like Scott's idea that we don't have to it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can get this out for feedback for people, and we can think about perhaps a presentation on an agenda where we are or not taking a vote. We could decide we're going to present it at one of these meetings and then come back to it at a following meeting to take an actual vote. Because part of our presentation might be, and I would think that part of it is we're going to want a discussion as the full body as to when we want these to take effect. I'm not sure that this subcommittee is charged with, hey, we want these to take effect in February versus May, right? And that's probably something that the bigger body would decide. And I believe that would be through the form of a motion. So I don't know if we need to schedule a subcommittee meeting outside of approving the minutes from tonight and or making modifications should we get feedback from the full body.
And so you see voting to occur in February or March?
Voting?
Yeah, or in January 17th. You think we can vote on January 17th?
I don't know if we can on that day. I think we have a meeting on January 30.
Okay, January
3-0, and I would
Right,
probably think that that might be an appropriate time to look at voting on it.
Okay, I think Sherry did say that. Sorry. Yeah, that's cool. No, let's wrap it up before budget season. Basically, is what you're saying.
Man, and that way it's not like a 14-day, we gave you 15 days notice, make a decision. There's enough time to hopefully get that feedback. Kamara, I know you have a hand up. I don't want to ignore you.
Oh, yeah, no, I think I was putting it all together. I think I'm thinking too. We send out the information, then present, and then go to the vote. And whichever timeline that kind of fits, kind of like what you guys are mentioning. I think we'll get a lot of information, but then to Sherry's point too, it'll help curtail any major blowback. So that might work, yeah.
Yeah, I think Sherry, you were first.
So if we were to send out an email getting feedback, and then the 17th presented a final text, we then only hit 13 days until the 30th, though.
I
ahead.
don't believe so. I don't believe you need it to be exact text though to be presented. If you look at our existing bylaws, and I just want to make sure that
Yeah, that's what I was just reading. It says provide the text of such amendment, provided the text of the amendment has been given to each member at least 14 days in advance. The text of such amendment may be amended without further notice until such amendment has been acted upon by the committee.
That's right. So I read that to be if we were to give it out 20 days in advance, you could modify it up until 1 day before that action takes place because people know that it's being worked on. That's the way that I look at it. I could be wrong. Not that you want to do that, right? You want to give that 14-day notice, but I don't think that the 17 versus the 30, I don't think that changes if we don't, unless we don't distribute it before the 17th.
Okay.
If there's a huge concern, we can look at a meeting in February for it. I'm not going to die on a hill on that battle. I'll tell you that. Does that seem like a fair approach for everybody?
Yeah, I think as long as we've asked for feedback before, I think we need one more round of asking for feedback, meeting, discussing the feedback, and then if we can have it out on the 16th, I know we're meeting on the 17th, but if we often send out the text of what we're going to be talking about in advance of the meeting, so that might be our 14 days of the finalized text. So if we can meet as a subcommittee to finalize before the 16th, then I think we can be in compliance.
Perfect. So why don't we have a meeting on the 12th, right? Oh no, I'm looking at December. I'm sorry. 17th is the meeting. Yeah, so we could look at is Monday the 16th is a holiday. Could we get feedback and meet like the 11th or 12th as a subcommittee?
I think that's smart.
12th
hopefully
is Thursday.
We could get it. Hopefully we could get the text included in the notes that go out for that meeting on the 17th.
Would that work for people? Perhaps the Thursday or the Wednesday?
If you do it on Wednesday, it can go out with the superintendent's report on Thursday.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
Let's try that.
Just going to share, and I think we've done this before. You've had two subcommittees in one night. There are subcommittees scheduled right now on that Wednesday and Thursday. But I think we've had two before. So just wanted to share that.
What schedule do you see that in front of you?
Yep. On the 11th, which is the Wednesday, I believe, is diversity. On the 12th, the Thursday is legal affairs.
I think we have a couple people at least on legal affairs here.
Yeah, we do.
Mm-hmm.
What about diversity? I'm not sure. Do we have anybody on?
I don't believe you do.
So do we want to try for the 11th? Okay, we'll shoot for the 11th at 6:30.
Yeah.
And we'll ask to get feedback. We'll ask for maybe the 10th to give or the 11th to give feedback, and we'll just have Randy be the schedule some intervals for reminders to go out from people. Sherry, go ahead.
Randy is on vacation this week, if I'm not wrong, Jim.
She is. We can work on getting it out, though. I think we can. Either I can look at what she did last time and try to mimic that, and she'll help me out if I really need it. She sent out a couple emails today when I was at work, so she's.
I know, but she's actually out of town starting tomorrow. So
Okay, well, if she's like Jim, can I just work with you on the? I can work with you on that, or can I work with you at Sherry to perhaps get that out to the body? Okay.
Sherry,
Yeah.
she didn't tell me that, so thank you.
Yeah, if she's Jim, we're gonna give her the time off, right? She's
Yeah.
got that time. Yeah. Okay. So Randy can watch this recording and see if we've all got her back. All right. So we've made it through the agenda here, and it's about 45 minutes since this meeting started. So I can certainly take a motion to adjourn unless there's something else that anybody wants to discuss.
So moved.
Second. Beat you.
In the ever importance of who seconded the adjournment, it is 7:17, and we'll note that Member Runstrom did beat Member Gavard by 1/100th of a second. So whoever's keeping track, I will make sure to note that in the minutes. If I do not, somebody definitely modify the minutes. I'll go in a roll call vote in the order I see people. Member Beardmore,
Beardmore, yes.
Member Gavarden,
Gordon, yes.
Member Runstrom.
Runstrom, yes.
And Lavoie, yes. I hope everybody has a wonderful new year. Stay safe and
Happy New
and
Year.
stay warm.
Happy New Year.
Take
Bye.
care.
Everyone.